Before we get started in the Kanien'kehá ways, it's our protocol to say the words that come before all else. And that is the Hohanda Gwariwatekwa. And because of my own colonization, I do not speak my language. I will share it with you in English. And I'll read it because I'm nervous. So we listen. This is Hohanda Gwariwatekwa. And so let us all listen for a moment. Just take a deep breath as we give thanks to the Creator, for it is He who has made everything that is in this universe. Let our minds come together as one, and let us give thanks to all people from the different directions. Let us give thanks to Mother Earth. Let us give thanks to the waters. Let us give thanks to all the fish. Let us give thanks to all our roots, our connections to our ancestors. Let us give thanks to all the plant life as they continue to do their job. Let us give thanks to all the medicines, the medicine plants, the medicine societies. Let us give thanks to the little insects that crawl on the ground and continue to do their work. Let us give thanks to the sustainers of life, the three sisters, the corn, beans, and squash. Let us give thanks to the fruits and our leader, which is the strawberry. We give thanks. Let us give thanks to the animals, and the leader is the deer. We give thanks to the deer. Let us give thanks to the birds, and give particular thanks to the eagle who flies highest in the sky, the leader of the birds. Let us give thanks to the trees, the shrubs, and particular thanks to the maple tree, as the maple tree is our leader. Let us give thanks to the four winds, north, east, south, and west. Let us give thanks to our grandfathers, the thunderers. Let us give thanks to our older brother, the sun. Let us give thanks to the stars in the heavens. Let us give thanks to the Creator, or maybe God, natural force, power that you call. Now we've come this far. This is as far as I'm capable of sharing with you. If I have forgotten anything, then you continue and be of one mind and keep healthy and share the words in your heart. Nyawakoa, all my relations. Thank you. So we have a beautiful panel here this afternoon. Of course, we have the star, Katsi'tsakwas Ellen Gabriel, who is an activist. She's an artist, a documentarian. She's a fierce Indigenous human rights and environmental rights activist. So we're glad to have her here to share her words from her book. We have Carleton. He's a settler historian and professor of history and Indigenous Studies at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, Manitoba Treaty 1 territory. Sean is a contributor to the book. And the discussion is going to be facilitated by Samir here, Samir Shaheen-Hussain. Samir is a racialized settler, social justice activist. He's a pediatric emergency physician and the author of an award-winning book, Fighting for a Hand and Hold, Confronting Medical Colonialism Against Indigenous Children in Canada. So welcome our panel for today. Glad you're here. Thank you. Before I turn it over to Samir to facilitate this, I wanted to say a few words. I'm from Kanehsatà. I also stayed behind barricades for 78 days in 1990. A young woman I was, many moons ago. Ellen is my dear cousin. She's not only a cousin, but she's a good friend to me. I've known her all my life. I got many secrets, too. Just kidding, just kidding. You know, I've always looked up to Ellen. She's a little bit older than I am, and I've always looked up to her as my role model cousin. As children, we both spent a lot of time on the land together with our cousins. Both our parents were farmers. My parents were dairy farmers. Ellen's parents were into horse ranching. So we got to ride horses a lot together, chasing cows, having a good time. You know, the land was our greatest teacher, and we were taught so young the responsibility of being caretakers of the land. So being farmers, that was a big teachings for us throughout our early life. That relationship with the land, relationship with the animals. And 1990 came. And you know, I want to just mention, today is September 26th. It's interesting that Ellen's book launch is September 26th because 34 years ago was the day that the barricades came down and people left the treatment center 34 years ago this day, that it came to an end, well, somewhat of an end. So it's quite interesting that it is on this day. And so I have memories of that day coming up as I'm talking here. 1990 was a transformative time. The Kanien'kehá siege. Ellen was put forward as a spokesperson, and she did so with such conviction and passion. Her voice was one of strength and determination throughout that whole summer. I looked upon her with my 4 young children, and we always in awe of the powerful words that came out of her mouth to protect our land and to defend our fight. It was very strong and determined. I don't think that Canada was ready for such strong resistance and such a powerful woman. I don't think they were ready. I don't think they were ready for us fighting back to protect the land. The Kanien'kehá siege brought world attention to the injustices being forced upon Indigenous people in Canada, by Canada. The siege also gave voice to the silence of the injustice of our people, of First Nations across Canada. Many people stood up with us, and said, no more, no more. It also, the ugly part of it also gave permission for the racism in Quebec to come out in full force. And many of our people were victims of racism in the city, the streets of Montreal, the streets of Quebec. In the big cities, a lot of our people faced racism. The siege also pushed forth the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People. This Royal Commission resulted in a 7-volume document published, and it identifies the challenges First Nations people are facing, and also has hundreds of calls of action for us to do, to make life better, to make our quality of life better. The calls to action and remedies to deal with our issues in our community are all defined by Indigenous people in this report. So if you haven't read the Royal Commission report, which came out in 1998, it's still alive, it's still good, it's still relevant to the calls of action that need to happen. The Kanien'kehá siege, a lot has been said, a lot has been written in the media. Videos, video productions, mostly produced by outsiders of our community. But today, we have a voice from the inside of Kanien'kehá. Katsi'tsakwas is sharing her truth from behind the barricades. She shares some of her insights from that summer that put Ellen on the path of human rights defender. She has advocated for women's rights, land rights, courageously spoken out against those who live with an injustice, those who cause harm. Ellen has shown a lot of strength in speaking out against these injustices. In this book, Ellen shares her experience on resistance, internationalism, resurgence, and what it means to be the keeper of the Eastern Door. Nyawa, Ellen, for all your work. You have done a lot of work to nurture activism and to be speaking your truth. I say nyawa koa.
Kanien'kehá, Wanda, thank you so much. Avant de commencer, je vais répéter ce que Wanda avait dit un peu plus tôt, que si les gens ont besoin de traduction vers l'interprétation vers le français, vous pouvez juste aller voir Guillaume au coin en arrière. On a quelques casques pour ça. First of all, welcome to everyone. Thank you all for being here. I think it's really, really heartwarming and very moving. I said I'm not going to cry. To see everyone here for Ellen's book launch. There's also, I see in the crowd, many elders who are here as well, and other friends of long-standing of Ellen's. So it really is very powerful to have everyone in this one space. I'm going to just start with some, I guess, housekeeping points, as it were, but before even getting to that, I just want to do a few thank yous. So thank you to Norma Rantisi for coordinating and organizing all of this. And the many, many, many volunteers who I won't name because I probably don't even know all of them who are here, who are helping Norma with organizing and working behind the scenes even now to make this event possible. Thank you to the endorsing groups for their support. So Academics for Palestine Concordia, Art History Decolonial Action Group, the Caring for Social Justice Collective, Social Justice Center, Concordia Student Union, Health Workers Alliance for Palestine, Office of Indigenous Directions, Research for the Frontlines, and Shift Center for Social Transformation. Thank you to Espace Jacques and the staff and volunteers here for making this space available and so welcoming. In terms of just the agenda for the rest of the evening, the idea is basically going to be to try have a bit of a discussion around the book, around Ellen's life work, essentially. And we'll probably do that for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for question and answers or discussion after that. There are, just as a reminder, Ellen's books are on sale on the corner just to my right here with Left Wing Books, who are distributing Between the Lines book When the Pine Needles Fall. There will be book signing with Ellen and Sean afterwards as well. So while we're going to be kind of winding down, they'll be sitting there to sign books if people would like. So to begin the discussion, I just want to say in full transparency to all of you who are here, when Ellen asked me first to moderate this discussion, I suggested to her that she should ask someone else. There are actually many people who are much more skilled than I am at facilitating, including some people who are actually here in this room right now. However, the argument that convinced me to accept Ellen's invitation, humbling invitation, came from my partner, who highlighted that it would be important for me to do this, given the long-standing relationship and friendship that we have shared for 28 plus years. So while I'll do my best to moderate the discussion, it will be impossible to cover all the gifts that serve as beacons of light through the words shared by Ellen in this book. So as such, please feel free to ask questions that I will inevitably miss or not have time to ask Ellen and Sean during the Q&A. So to begin, Ellen, early on in the book, you share the following, and I wrote it down here. I learned more about our history and about the pines in particular as a kind of last vestige of our common land in the community, a symbol of our freedom. Although the siege of Kanehsatà in 1990 is not the sole focus of your book, but it is a central element of it, there are many people in this room who were probably not even born in 1990. And even for many of those who are old enough to remember it, their perceptions of what actually happened have often been warped by how the mainstream media covered the events, including by referring to it as the Oka crisis, itself a form of erasure. So maybe just for everyone here, just to start, can you explain what happened on July 11th, 1990, including the lead up to the events that unfolded throughout that summer, whose history actually goes back for centuries?
Yeah, well, first I want to say thank you to everybody for coming out. As Samir mentioned, it's very heartwarming to see all of you here, and I'm so grateful to have you, and I'm grateful to Wanda's words and her opening of Wanda Gabriel, and to Samir, and of course to Sean, who came up with the idea to begin with. so I can't take credit for it all. But he has been following all the work that I've been doing, and to talk about 1990 is really something that I've talked about for like the past 34 years, but at the same time, there is so much to unpack from that time, because we are just one of many generations who have fought against settler colonialism. We've had 300 years of resistance in various forms. And in 1990, when the municipality of Oka was going to remove our family, my parents are buried in that cemetery, as well as my grandmother and aunties and uncles. And I'm just one of many people in the community who have relatives buried there. And we said, no way. And so we decided to put up a barricade on a secondary dirt road. We never blocked a highway until they attacked us. So a lot of community meetings, a lot of decisions made collectively, a lot of arguments about weapons, whether they should be there or not. And it was decided that they should not be there, but people did bring them. But I think what was really difficult that summer, or even the time from March on, was the fact that even our own community members didn't see that as something worthy of our time. And that the people in Oka who were racist, not all of them are racist, but there were people in Oka saying that we didn't have a right to our land. They still say that. The mayor of Oka still says we have no rights to the land. And so having grown up, as Wanda said, in the pines, riding the horses, there was moonlight trails, it was so wonderful. And to know that it's been a place of refuge for so many of our people to hide from the Sulpicians, to hide, to protect their children. I think a lot of people decided that we're not gonna let you take this last piece of land. This is the only piece of land that we have left for the community. And so we had quite a bit of adventures, especially in the spring. And some of the men were getting poison ivy because they would share this, the camo paint and go into the woods at night where you can't see the poison ivy. So there was a lot of funny stories. And when the injunctions came, we were like, it's our land, we don't recognize this court's jurisdiction. And so when the raid happened, we just expected to be arrested. We did not expect to be shot at, because I think the intent, and a lot of us believe that they came to kill us. They did not come to dismantle the barricade. That was just, if you look at some of the coroner's report, some of the SQ who were the head were saying, like, this is crazy, we can't go in there, it's dangerous for us. But the ones higher up, who probably had a share in the golf course, said, no, you gotta go in. So the women were the ones who went to the front. And I think for me, that's really important to share that part of the story, is because the women were there leading, no weapons, facing men with weapons and shaking hands, swearing at us, and we stayed. And the only reason I think that we were able to do that is because we held hands, and that sharing of energy to say F you to the SQ, that we were able to keep our stance. And so by the time the community came around, I think 6:30, we had already gone to the front 3 times with different kinds of tear gas, different kinds of concussion grenades. And so at 8:30, they opened fire on us, and it began the 78-day siege. We were denied our fundamental human rights. We were all categorized as criminals. We were all considered part of a conspiracy against the municipality of Oka, and every single person that left the community was arrested. They were, I mean, Wanda has stories. I didn't leave the community because they were after me anyways, but I think about those elders and all those kids that are now grown-ups. And we see that, you know, the siege was something that was a horrible thing, but I think it woke a lot of us up. And for me, I think that was worth it, because people had no clue that we still existed. A lot of people assumed that the Indians had been conquered, they're gone, they're living on reserves, and they're living there in peace, which was not the case. So, yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Thank you. I'm going to kind of skip, because I have like many questions, but I'm going to skip back and forth just because based on stuff that you're saying. Because you also mentioned the fact that it woke people up. And so I guess another related question is, so in 2024, over 34 years after, what's the legacy, I guess, both victories and challenges of the siege of Kanehsatà, but not only for the community, but also for folks in Kahnawake, for Kanien'kehá, or more generally for the Haudenosaunee, for other Indigenous communities, because it was a rallying cry for other Indigenous communities, and if you have time, for settler colonial peoples.
That's an easy question.
It's hard to think of the positives for my community, because we have never been able to settle down from that time. Some of you who have read in the news the lawlessness that's going on in the community, I attribute that to the Canadian government being really pissed that we destroyed their altar boy image of being a human rights defender. And, you know, the community is, as Wanda has taught me, it's trauma reactions, and it continues, and it's dangerous to live in this community now because of that. But one of the positive things was the Royal Commission came from our recommendations to Parliament. The Royal Commission exposed the Indian residential school system for what it is, and a form of genocide, not cultural genocide. I want to make that clear. The mandate for the TRC did not give them the right to say genocide. So they did if we can call it a softer term, cultural genocide. And this genocide is ongoing in Canada. It hasn't changed. We have more children in the child welfare system than ever went to Indian residential school. As you know, Wanda and I are both day school survivors. And we didn't learn our language there. I learned my language at home. Both my parents were Mohawk. And I think what it did was change the course of education within Indigenous communities. And people started realizing, oh yeah, our language is important. Our language is just as important as the colonial languages. And so in education, that changed. And Sean is also, you know, a teacher, so it moved people like Sean to teach this in their classrooms. Because Sean uses At the Wood's Edge, and I've spoken in Sean's class. There is a renewed interest in Indigenous peoples and our realities and the struggles that we face. But at the same time, all we hear is rhetoric from government, your leaders, the people that you elect. All we hear is, oh, we're sorry, here's money for reconciliation, but we're not getting our land back. And last night I spoke at a CANRAC function, and I asked people in the audience, I said, how many of you know about land back? And they all raised their hands, right? So I asked them an even profounder question, which is, how many of you are willing to give your land back to the Indigenous people upon whose lands you are on? There was one person that raised their hand. So it goes to the point that support for Indigenous people is conditional. It's not based on reconciliation. It's based on, I want to get to know you, but not too close. And so for me, I think that there have been, in some respects, great strides in how people understand Indigenous people from Turtle Island. And again, I have to go to another teacher, which is you, Samir, in writing a book on medical colonialism, because we see that that has impacted our communities in very detrimental ways. So the waking up wasn't just Indigenous people, the waking up was the world. And I think it also helped all those brave Indigenous people who were working at the international level to get the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples passed. Canada was one of the colonial countries that voted against it under Stephen Harper. But I think there's been so much that's happened, and I think it's because Indigenous people are working at it, and I think because we have allies who are trying to help us, because we could not do this without you. Government doesn't listen to us. They don't care what we think. They just pat us on the head and say, good little Indians, and they control the purse strings. So in some ways, things have stayed the same, and in other more beautiful ways, in our allyship and friendship with meeting other Indigenous people, meeting our allies. I think it's opened doors. And like a really good friend of mine, and who was a lawyer, said, you know, justice is slow. We can't make it go faster. So we're just here to ask you two guys to push it along.
Thank you. Maybe I'll ask Sean just to comment on that kind of same question in terms of, you know, when we're talking about the legacy for those of us who are here as settlers, and I mean, you're a settler historian, so we have a different perspective to provide. What for you do you see as being kind of the legacy of 1990?
Yeah, well, first, thanks so much to Ellen. It's such an honor to be here with you and Samir and Wanda, and to share this moment with all of you. Thank you for being here, everybody organizing. And in some ways, Samir, your question is a great way to introduce people to what this book is about, because I asked Ellen a very similar question. What is the legacy of 1990? As a one-off interview for an activist magazine I was with called Canadian Dimension, and she taught me about 300 years of history, and she had this incredible vision for the future. And I realized in that moment that there was so much to learn for me. You know, I'm a professor, I teach history and Indigenous Studies, and yet I was a humble student in that moment and really had a lot to unpack and learn. And so in many ways, this book is a larger version of that initial question and a tracing of all of these different aspects, all of that 300 years of history that led Ellen to be in the position that she was in the summer of 1990, and everything that has happened since, right? And thinking about what that legacy was for her personally, what it meant to her community, what it means here in so-called Canada, but also in the context of the world. I know Ellen had talked about, you know, the Zapatistas, for example, hearing about the resistance in Canada and thinking about those kind of global ripple effects of people resisting settler colonialism around the world. It's not just here. And so for me, I think the surprising answer is that Ellen very candidly talks about in the book, and if you ask her, that the legacy of 1990 is mixed. And she says it very eloquently in the book that it was very successful for other people, other communities. It created that awareness, right? That awakening for a lot of other Indigenous nations and for non-Indigenous allies, but that it had a detrimental effect within the community. And I think that that actually is something that we all need to grapple with, something that often people celebrate for putting us on the path to the Royal Commission, right? The Royal Commission wakes people up further. It shines a spotlight on the residential school system. It puts us on the path towards truth and reconciliation. and yet we're still seeing more land theft in Kanehsatà today. That, in many ways, I think, is a metaphor for where we're at in Canada today. That often Indigenous people who stand up and resist are punished to make, the settler capitalist society that we live in continue to function. And this project started in the context of what was happening in northwestern British Columbia, and thinking about the connections between 1990 and what was happening with Wet'suwet'en territory. And so I think there's a lot to be learned from Ellen's life, but all of the different pieces that she weaves throughout this book in thinking about that complicated legacy. One of the things that I was very inspired by, and always am inspired when I talk to you, Ellen, is her weaving of the past, present, and future into everything. In order to understand this, you need to understand the history. That will help us in the present. It will also help us envision a better world. And not everyone has that ability, and I'm just very humbled to have this conversation with you and be able to share your lessons with the wider world.
Thank you, Sean. Trying to keep an eye on time, too. Okay, we're good. So, because there's going to be a few questions I'm going to have to skip. But one I think that's really important, you kind of allude to it, and certainly Wanda talked about it. Ellen, you were chosen to be the spokesperson for your community. But you've also always kind of, in the book anyway, you talk about this and in talks that you give and in personal conversations too, you often remind people that's not about you. And so I guess I want to kind of use that to talk about, maybe we'll get a clip going if Godwin can do it from your documentary.
On March 9th, 1990, the Mohawk community of Kanehsatà decided to block a secondary dirt road located in the center of a sacred piney wood forest in order to stop the expansion of a 9-hole golf course and condominium development.
They're coming in. The cops are in. Cops are in. Oh. It's gunfire.
So you've been an artist, as far as I know, for possibly even longer than you've been a land defender. But your work has been intersectional long before that term came into common use. So your recent award-winning documentary film with the same name as the book, When the Pine Needles Fall, tells a story of the siege of Kanehsatà with a specific focus on the role of Kanien'kehá women. So I guess you alluded to it a bit earlier, but I think it'd be important maybe for you to share why it was important for you to reframe, and you talk about this in the book, the common narrative of the siege to tell another story of what happened by focusing on the women who were with you.
Well, the media, as most people know, like flashy things. They're kind of like crows in that sense. They like flashy things, baubles. And we were just not that glamorous, just Indigenous women. The guys wearing bandanas and holding weapons looked a lot more sexier than we did. But it quickly became about weapons. It quickly became, and that's why, the Canadian Army was on standby on July 10th. And on July 11th, the Premier of Quebec wanted the Army to come in. And John Chacha, who was Minister of Indian Affairs for Quebec at the time, said, no, don't. This is not a good idea. So the voices of the women and the voices of the people was quickly lost. And for me, knowing the women that were there who stood up against the police, who stood up against the army, they fulfilled their roles and obligations according to our constitution of Kanien'kehá, the Great Love Peace. That wasn't in what we see in the media. And for me to reclaim that narrative, even from Alaniso Bamsuin, I want to reclaim that narrative from her because she took something from us when she did that. It's a good film, don't mistake me. It's a good film to learn, but it doesn't talk about the 300 years of resistance. It doesn't talk about how important the role of the women are in defending the land. The men protect the people. And it became about warriors. It didn't become about the land. We totally lost that issue during the whole media blitz. And I'm not sure about the rest of you, but I want to hear the truth about issues. And so this is my way of contributing to those faces not yet born, to tell the story from our perspective and not the media perspective or someone who's not from the community. The women that I know have always been nurturing. They're tough. You gotta have, skin 7 spans thick if you wanna learn something from a Mohawk woman. But we're loyal and we're there. I still believe that the police and the army were more afraid of the women than they were of the men. And we never had weapons. So in honor of those women, in honor of all the previous generations of women who have fought the church, who have fought the municipality, who have fought the Canadian government, I felt it really important to express that because people think that we are a patriarchy. We are not. We are matrilineal. And we have a democracy that inspired the United States. They screwed it up, mind you. But it's a democracy that not just thinks about us as human beings, but it includes, like Wanda said, it includes the rights of all the animals, the plants, the four-leggeds, the fish, everything that we rely on to live. So for me, protecting Mother Earth is the story.
So I'm going to maybe switch gears a little bit, but it still actually bounces off this, what you just kind of responded. So you and I, as well as others, probably share a passion for films. So I remember going to watch Inuk filmmaker Zacharias Kunig's Atanarjuat, The Fast Runner with you. I don't know if you remember when it came out in theaters in 2002. And over the last few years, we have tended to watch more superhero movies and sci-fi. But one sci-fi movie that we haven't watched together is Denis Villeneuve's Arrival, which is based on Ted Chiang's novella, The Story of Your Life. And one of the main themes of the film has to do with how language shapes our understanding of and relation with the living and non-living world, including, in the case of the movie, with those not from this world. But in the book, you make an important connection about telling stories and language. Let me just see if I can find it. So you say, but it's those storytellers that have given us that creative ability to imagine our history, our worldview, our cultural values, and there is even more of an impact from these stories through the words of our languages. Our languages describe in a visual way which colonial languages cannot. So I guess one question that's really important, because this comes up oftentimes in the book, what is the role that your language, Kanien'kehá, has played for you in the work that you have done for the last 30 plus years?
Well, I think language is who you are as a person. I grew up hearing my language. My mother and my father's side, they both spoke Kanien'kehá. And so the language to me was important. And as you know, as a youth, I moved away. I went to school here in Montreal, and I'm using English most of the time. And I'm educated in English. You know, Mohawks, Cree, Mi'kmaq, I think we're all schooled in English. You can correct me if I'm wrong. So as you get older, you get a little bit smarter, and you realize the preciousness of the things that you had when you were growing up. And, you know, really understanding the language when you break it down. Like, Kanien'kehá is 80% verbs, so it's action-oriented. But it also is a very visual, very descriptive sort of language that pulls you into what you're talking about. So for me, even just like reading the creation story, which would take days to recount, it's very different when it's translated into French or English. The colonial languages just cannot capture the subtle nuances of our language. And I'm sure the Cree, Anishinaabe, and other Indigenous folks who are here will say the same thing, that things don't quite translate as well. And because I heard it as a child growing up, like I said, as you get older, you get a little bit smarter. You realize that this is really something that is a part of you. Even if you know a little bit of words, it becomes a part of you because that's what your ancestors spoke. That's how your ancestors saw the world, through that language. And so all those teachings come from that language and get translated down into a colonial language for those who cannot speak it to understand. But there is so much richness in it. Like my name, Katsi'tsakwas, it means picking up flowers. And like you don't have these names in English and French, right? Your name is not, I'm picking up flowers. So to me, it's very precious. It also gives us that strengthening the relationship we have with the natural world, with each other, but also with the natural world. And when we say, you know, our elder brother, the sun, or our grandmother, moon, that means we're related. We're related somehow. And this is why I think we need to assimilate you guys, to understand the preciousness of the environment, the preciousness of language, of life. We shouldn't be arguing about, you're going to have to speak French, or you're going to have to speak English, you're going to write tests to our youth. That should not even be existing in 2024. Indigenous people have a right to self-determination, and that right to self-determination includes the ability to use the language of our choice in regards to the teachings of our youth. So language to me is a really, really important part of that recuperating, I guess, the Indigenous identity that was attacked by colonization.
Do you want to, it seemed like you wanted to go for it.
I could listen to Ellen talk forever. Something that you were saying there also helped, I guess, me think about why this book is such a gift. Because not everyone has the opportunity to sit down with Ellen and learn from her. But even as you were just speaking right now, I'm thinking anyone who's interested in dreaming of a better world, a world outside of what we are currently experiencing, you know, listening to Ellen talk about how things are, how things could be different, right? That the conviction to stand up in 1990 wasn't just about that. It was about all the things that you were just talking about, and it was also because you had a vision of the future that could be different, that is not about extracting value from the natural world for profit, right? But something that's more sustainable. And that is something that everyone needs to find a way to dream of. And I think we can learn a lot from the lessons that Ellen is putting forward in this book by talking exactly from that very grounded perspective. It's something that a lot of non-Indigenous people, we don't have those connections. We don't know what it is like to live here for thousands of years. We are connected to other places. And so if we want to figure out a different way of being, of relating to one another and all of our relations, we need to listen to what people like Ellen have to teach us. We need to get there and quickly. And this book is part of inviting people into learning what that could be like.
Thank you, Sean. So your intervention is making me shift a bit here, but that's okay. So this is going to be a bit of a long preamble, but I think it dovetails well with what Sean just said. So bear with me for the long preamble. So if I remember correctly, you and I first met through Reverend Gwenda Wells, a common acquaintance from Mcgill chaplaincy service late in 2001, when you were the director of the First Peoples House at Mcgill, and I was involved with groups at Cupid McGill who organized the Humanity for Hope event, where we had invited you to speak. So I'm sometimes embarrassed by the name we gave that event, but I still think it was important that we organized it. It was mostly in response to the backlash faced by Arab, Muslim, and other communities on campus after the 9/11 attacks, at a time when the social and political climate was already very tense on campus because we were in the midst of the Second Intifada. The students I was organizing with wanted to bring different voices together to talk about peace and justice, and it was basically the first real political-ish event that I organized. I was a medical student, and you were the Ellen Gabriel. And I have to admit that after all these years, and also because I was very sleep deprived at the time, I can't recall exactly what you had said, but I do remember being very impacted by your words that simultaneously evoked a deep sense of strength and fierceness, of wisdom and of humility. And so, I have no doubt that your words played a significant role in forcing me to rethink my presence, as I think Sean was alluding to, on these lands and my responsibilities to the First Peoples, especially given the genocides that have resulted from European settler colonialism here. A few months later, I formed the Indigenous People Solidarity Movement with a bunch of other Mcgill students at the time when we wanted to prioritize decolonization and anti-colonial solidarity work to tangibly support Indigenous people self-determination and sovereignty. And in its early days, before we moved off campus, you allowed and invited IPSM, who was mostly made up of racialized and white settler Mcgill students at the time, to have our meetings at the First Peoples House. And you played an important mentoring role for many of us. In fact, that is when you and I became friends. And I won't specifically name people here, but many of those student activists went on to devote their life's work to social justice in different ways and continue to do so now. So you almost certainly altered the course of my life, as you have done for so many others, including very certainly many people in this room. So now I'm going to bring it back to the book. So in the book, at one point, when you referred to the role played by Beverly Jacobs, at a time when you had gone on to become the president of Quebec Native Women, you share that, put on page 135, in organizing and in life, you always need somebody to plant the seeds and push from the grassroots. So, as my question, as someone who has played this very role of planting seeds and pushing from the grassroots for generations of activists, why have you always given so much importance to this day to working with youth and young adults, both Indigenous and settler?
Actually, I never realized that. I guess I don't necessarily look for that. I just it's the youth that come to me and ask questions. I think the older generation are a little bit maybe more shy, I don't know. And I'm really honored that's, you know, of your words, because I guess I don't look at age when people are talking to me and they have something interesting to say and to share, and I try to share, because you know, over the years that I've traveled around this beautiful planet, I've met a lot of Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people who have taught me a lot, just by sitting and listening to their stories and their realities. And so I think that it's just human, and I think it's honoring being human to share your knowledge with others. And I've been very fortunate to have so many good teachers that taught me along the way. So if I can be a teacher to youth, I welcome that. If I can teach somebody my age or older, I welcome that as well, because I think we're all teachers in a different way. I sometimes think that people are intimidated by me and my fierceness, and I understand that. I get it. Sometimes I sometimes can't control it, but it depends on what we're talking about. But I think it's our duty, you know, when we think about the Haudenosaunee and the medicine wheel, and other Indigenous philosophies in the medicine wheel, we're teaching. We're not just going one way. We sometimes go forward and then go backwards and go forward. And I think teaching is just a beautiful way to be a human being.
So your point about the medicine wheel brings me to a part that's like, I think there's like one mention of it in the book, maybe two. So you mentioned in the book that after high school you went into nursing, but that you didn't become a nurse, partly because art has always been your passion. And so it kind of, reading that line and thinking back to that, reminded me of the powerful mini-series that we've talked about, but I don't think you've seen yet, released during the COVID-19 pandemic called Station 11, which basically follows the lives of a few individuals who try to make sense of the world by rebuilding community, including through art, after more than 99% of the population, of the human population, has been wiped out because of an influenza pandemic. And there's a particularly moving line in the second to last episode of the show when a woman who has just given birth makes a particularly insightful comment to one of the protagonists who is pretending to be a doctor to help people like her go through the birthing process. She says, you know, you don't have to still keep pretending that you're like a medical doctor. You're a healer. And so for me, it underscored that you don't have to be a healthcare worker to be a healer. And that particular line in that particular show also highlights the role of art in healing and rebuilding, essentially what can be considered a form of resurgence. And so at one point in your book, you share that art, and I'll read from the book. Sorry. Where'd it go? So there's too many references here. Yeah, so you say arts can be powerful and healing, not just for the artist, but for the viewer as well. Indigenous artists who include the stories of historical injustice, the challenges, but choose to highlight our ongoing strength and resilience rooted in our land, language, and cultures can make art a powerful medicine of healing and reconciliation. So I guess the question then is, how do you see your work as an artist, as healing work, as medicine?
It's healing for me because I get to put my frustrations out on canvas. If it's healing for other people, I think art is a very non-threatening way to teach people. It can be in your face, but it's still not somebody, you can take the time to digest what you're looking at. You can take the time, it'll come to you like even afterwards. The feeling a painting gives you, an illustration, a sci-fi movie. You're telling my secrets now.
I didn't say which one.
But I think like most artists, whether you're a dancer, visual artists, or any kind of artist, I think it's healing because artists are, as someone said, and I can't remember who said this, artists are the conscience of society. And if we look at Picasso, if we look at the Impressionists, we look at Kent Monkman's work, those are really in your face. Those are things that have an obvious message to them. And I think that it's a great way to teach. I mean, when we teach kids, we're teaching them visuals plus words. And I don't think we ever grow out of that sort of way of learning of visuals and words. And so some of my work has words in it. It's very, very rare. But hopefully it gets people thinking and talking. That's, to me, is healing.
Thank you. I'm going to keep an eye on time. So maybe we'll try a couple more questions, and then I'm sure people have questions that they want to ask as well. I'll go back to maybe just touch on a bit on the question of solidarity, because it has come up a bunch in the book, obviously. So, I was in elementary school during the siege of Kanehsatà, so my memories of it are quite limited, and I certainly didn't have a sense of what exactly was happening or why. It also didn't help that the only times when Indigenous peoples came up in school for me before then, they were referred to as savages. I remember being shocked by images in the news of white settlers in Shadow Gay burning effigies of Kanien'kehá people. I also remember being forever marked, in a good way this time, by family pictures from a solidarity demonstration with the Kanien'kehá communities of Kanehsatà and Kahnawake that summer, with my dad holding up a placard that said, ni police, ni armée, justice. So no police, no army, justice. And my older brother holding one that said justice for Indigenous peoples, justice pour les autochtones. In the book, you highlight over and over again the importance of solidarity, referring to it as key, also as uplifting, and a source of positive energy when everything feels daunting. So I guess one of my questions, what forms did solidarity take in 1990? And what did those acts of solidarity mean to you then? And what forms does solidarity take today? And what do those acts of solidarity mean to you now in your ongoing work, climate justice, missing murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit peoples, so on and so on?
It's interesting you talk about it. Is François Saillant still here? François was one of the founders, I think, of Solidarité avec les Autochtones. And I remember my friend May also. I saw her in the CBC clips. And some other people here who were protesting in front of Robert Barras's office on Rennes-Lévesque. And I wasn't aware, and a lot of us were not aware of the protests that were going on in Montreal till a little bit afterwards. And it was very uplifting because one of the things I think that's really important when people are in situations the way we were in is to know that we're not alone. That what the government is saying about us is not true, that there's people who actually don't believe the government and they are actually out there in support of us. And solidarity for me is so important because it lifted my spirits. Just like Kahnawake did in blocking the bridge. I mean, I will forever be grateful to the community of Kahnawake for doing that. And the solidarity is extremely important because we are all fighting the same monster. We are fighting capitalistic greed that justifies its violence against Indigenous peoples or people of color through its propaganda. And so the solidarity for me is precious. And people who didn't know us were risking getting arrested. They spent a lot of time protesting, and to me, that is precious because they are taking time out of their day to do that for us. And that's why I think that the solidarity movement needs to continue to grow and to grow. And as I said, we need to assimilate you. We're going to have assimilation workshops soon. And my good friend Alma is going to help with that. She's Cree, James Bay Cree. And I remember talking to someone from James Bay saying, you know, they called us to say, take down those power lines. And we just hunted, and we had a freezer full of moose, so we weren't going to do that. And just like the little barricades that were going up on reservations in Indigenous communities right across Canada, and just to see the people protesting for us, you know, that was really something powerful for our people to see, that, especially for the ones who didn't agree with us. It's not like, oh, maybe we were wrong. But I think that the solidarity movement today is growing stronger. I think you can disagree with me or not, I think Palestine has exposed all those issues that have been raw for us as Indigenous people for centuries. We know that your governments have been corrupt, and it's been interesting for me to see the solidarity movement for people coming here, and for people in neighboring municipalities who fight together with us against the dumping, illegal dumping in our community. I have an ally here, sitting here, from St. Marthe, right? St. Marthe-sur-le-Lac. We can't do this alone. We're still under the Indian Act, and so that limits what we can or cannot do. So I hope that you will continue to be standing with us side by side, you know. And like Sean said, Sean is a new father, and I told him, we got to make a better future for your daughter, your grandkids. We don't need all this violence. We just need peace. We need to have peace in our minds and peace in our hearts. And we need you to transmit that to your leaders. Because we don't have time to waste anymore in the climate crisis that we're all experiencing.
Just quickly to say that the second to last chapter of the book is a conversation that Ellen and I had, sort of thinking about her lessons and reflections on the Shutdown Canada movement, and exactly to Samir's point about the importance of solidarity, and you know that solidarity is key for collective action. But you can't be in solidarity with people you don't understand, and that awareness is something that I think a lot of non-Indigenous people, through Idle No More and others, you know, they're starting to learn more, but there is a lot still yet to do to understand that we do face collective harms, and that we need to find ways to work together so that we're stronger, right? Capitalist society makes us individuals, and as individuals we are weak. But when we work together, we are stronger, and that importance of solidarity is something you know, also that Ellen talks about in the last chapter, the hope that we can figure this out, that we're not constantly going to be divided and conquered and lose always, that there is this I don't know where you find it, but this incredible hope for the future, that you refuse to give up on humanity, and humanity in a way that thinks not just about itself in a narrow way, but in a collective way, in thinking about all of the relations. To me, again, as a new father, as someone who, you know, has been thinking a lot about what the future is going to look like, my hope is that people can learn from Ellen and we can figure this out quick.
I'm going to ask one last. I'm going to skip a few questions. I'm going to ask one last question. I mean, one of them was going to be about Palestine, but you already addressed that. So I think it is worth highlighting, though. I mean, I think for many people, you know, you've been very inspiring, kind of at a time when many people were afraid to speak out in solidarity with people in Palestine, you know, resisting to basically live a dignified life. You've been out there every weekend, going to marches, speaking out, and so I think that's, you know, when we're talking about global solidarity, I think it also speaks to, like you said, the links between different settler colonialisms, but also the links of solidarity that get created through that. I mean, I think, you know, just the fact to me that Norma is organizing this event, and the relationship that you two have built over the years is telling on that front as well. So maybe just before opening up to questions, the last one, we'll kind of basically talk about the future a bit. And so I'm going to start a bit on a downer, but hopefully we'll end on a more uplifting note. So I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one who feels that the times we live in often feel very bleak, but you repeatedly highlight in your book the importance of defending your sacred land, and as you mentioned earlier, for the faces not yet born. In the first page of the book, in the chapter entitled Ohando Gariwadekwa, the words that come before all else, you write that when life's challenges arise, one needs to ground oneself. Sorry, these little notes for myself. And grounding yourself is a daily routine. It's a practice based on seeing the world as it is, a flawed society, but one in which there are so many people with talents and gifts to offer. We have a beautiful Mother Earth who, with every season, gives us gifts and new things to marvel at. So my last question is this, and this is inspired by Nazila. What sustains you? Or perhaps put another way, even though people often consider home to only be a physical space in fixed time, what does home mean for you?
You really got me doing mental gymnastics here, Samir. That's a really interesting question, and I challenge anyone out there to answer it. But home is wherever I am. I mean, I think of my physical home, and I think of the people that make that physical home enjoyable, like Wanda, like my partner Tracy, and all my friends that have listened to me bitching, have listened to my frustration, have listened to me, like Sean. Sean's heard an earful, and so have you. Home to me is just this whole planet. And wherever I go, there she is. You know, as Haudenosaunee people, some of you might probably already know this, the eastern door for the Haudenosaunee people of the Longhouse, is where the sun rises. And the western door is where the sun sets. The sky is the roof and the earth is our floor. So that's how I like to say that my home is everywhere. And I think, like anybody, they should feel welcome and they should feel comfortable and safe anywhere they go. It's a lofty hope and an ideal. But to me, I think it's possible. I think we should not think it's impossible. We just need to be able to treat the earth and all our relations a bit better. But yeah, thank you for that. Thank you, Sean. Wanda.
Thank you. So I think we'll close up the discussion, facilitate a discussion from here, but we wanted to make sure that there's time for people who have come to listen to Ellen speak about the book and share her knowledge, her wisdom, to have a chance to hear from you. So there were plenty of time for book signing and speaking with Ellen after the Q&A as well. But there's a lot of collective wisdom in this room right now, and so out of respect for others and so that everyone benefits from interventions that people make, I just ask please to keep questions short to allow Ellen to respond, and we can have about, Sean, sorry, of course, and we'll have about 20 minutes or so to... Sorry, the microphones are right there.
Hello, thank you for the discussions. My name is Laurent from Timiskaming First Nation. You briefly mentioned at the beginning the sort of collective organizing that went into, putting up the the barricades during the Kanehsatà resistance. I was wondering if you had any sort of suggestions for someone trying to organize in a community where that sense of community and that togetherness has been sort of eroded by assimilationist policies and capitalism and all that. Thank you.
So just to clarify, you want to know how to do a barricade?
No. What I want to know...
That's what I'm an expert at. No.
What I want to know is, how do I put this? What goes into bringing people together to say, this is what needs to be done, this is how we're going to do it, especially in a context where the community is kind of atomized and a sense of like individualism and that kind of capitalist, entrepreneurship for me has kind of taken root and eroded that natural coming together and collective governance in Indigenous communities.
I can't say I have anything to add to the way that we do things in the Longhouse, which is everybody gets a voice and they feel safe when they're talking, and that we make a decision with collectively. I'm not an expert on this, on how to bring people together, because in my community, we can't even have community meetings without violence breaking out. So I'm not sure I'm the right person to say that, but anybody in any democracy, you need to feel safe to be able to speak your truth. We did it based on those teachings and our laws. We followed those laws to be able to come together and make a decision as a collective. We're not able to do that anymore because of many factors, which I won't go into. But in 1990, that's what we did. After 1990, it fell apart because we didn't have trust amongst each other. If you don't have trust, then that's the thing you've got to work on before. And as Indigenous people with multi-generational trauma, trust is one of the hardest things that we can give to someone as a gift. This is something, my wise cousin here told me and taught me. I think you just got to work at it, and you just got to be able to present your arguments and present your position in a respectful way, in a way that has a vision of a solution. When we started the barricades, it was like, okay, we're putting physical barricades up, but how do we deal with the land? And this is something that I think, as Indigenous people from my generation, we were always told, this is our land. Nobody's going to tell us to get off it, and we're going to fight for it. It's a very simple thing, but yet it isn't. So if you have that strength in your teachings, in your identity, you're already one step ahead. So I don't know if that answers your question. But.
It helps. Thank you.
Maybe could I just add something very quickly? One of the things that Ellen taught me a lot about in the latter half of our conversations when we were thinking about the current context was some of the lessons from 1990 about the law and who the law serves in a colonial and capitalist context. And we often hear in the context of more recent land defenders, right, that the rule of law, Canada's rule of law, needs to be respected. And I think you speak very eloquently in the book about who that rule of law serves and the ways in which people rely on that law and then get enmeshed in a system that's not going to find peace or justice for them or for all of us. So I think that understanding the limitations of the law, and then very quickly, one other point that we haven't talked about is the double-edged nature of this, in that understanding that colonial laws are limited, and yet continuing to fight on the international level, and a lot of the work that you do at the United Nations and how that is connected to this longer history, I think it is important that we can critique laws in Canada and yet still on the international level fight for things like the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. So I think there are actually a lot of lessons as someone who is not from this community, but is interested in organizing, that teaches us a lot about, if you're working in solidarity with land defenders, how to approach these exact kinds of strategy questions.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for sharing your experience and insights. My name is Manoj. I'm a journalism student at Concordia. So earlier you talked about kind of the need for changing the narrative and how the mainstream media kind of portrayed the 1990 crisis and so on. I'm curious, sort of, the other media like APTN, what role have they played in kind of changing that narrative, and what role do you see kind of moving forward? Like I think APTN, they're launching their new programming in Indigenous languages. So far they've been doing it in English and French. So I think starting this month or later this month, they're launching services in other languages as well. So yeah, I just wanted to hear about like what role have media like APTN played in the last decades since 1990, and what role do you see them playing in the future?
So role of the media, he was talking about, what the role of the media is today, things like APTN, which didn't work around in 1990, how might that change things? What's the role of the media today? Interesting question.
I think Indigenous media is ahead of mainstream media because they understand most of them are Indigenous, so they understand the realities and the history that they're coming from. So it's really important for us to see our people up there on the screen, either telling the news, talking about these issues in more detail, in more depth, because we don't get those chances on mainstream media. But the media, we have to be careful because the media can be a propaganda machine for governments, as we're seeing now, today. There was, I forgot an answer I was going to say. But I think the media has a role to play in reconciliation. I think the media has a strong role to play in debunking a lot of the myths about Indigenous people, and to not just come to our communities when something bad is happening. Sometimes they come during powwow time, but there's also a hesitancy in our communities for media to stay out because they don't get the story right. But I think what media today needs to do is to go back and learn about Canada's genocidal history. Most, if not some, journalists do understand that. Others don't care, right? We're just, like Mohawks are enemy number one in Quebec, right? We're the bad Indians. And if you hear Jacques Parizeau talk about Mohawks, you'll understand why I say that. But I think it plays an important role in shaping how people see us. So it's also really important that they get it done right to begin with. And I really don't see, I see small incremental changes, but the media needs to step up as you guys are doing and tell the truth, you know, not just these 30-second sound bites. They will never talk about the fact that the land issue in Kanehsatà is not settled, that the Oka Golf Course is still there. So I wish that there could be better journalism, but I see that journalism in independent media, and I think that's where I like to go. I don't know if I answered your question.
It helps, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Robbie Dillon. I'm a member of the Kanehsatà band. My grandmother was born in Kanehsatà, and just first of all, she adored you every day. We used to see you on the news, and she was just so proud of like a young Indigenous woman coming forward and standing up for us. So thank you for all of that. But I just want to say this term settler, I think we have to find another term, because all of you people, well-meaning or not, you've never settled anything. All you've ever done is disrupted things. And even if you had, there's a kind of arrogance in it, in the sense that like our land and our people needed to be settled. We were doing quite fine, you know, since the peacemaker anyways. And yeah, I just think we need to find another term, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I don't call people settlers. They call themselves settlers. So I will let them answer for you.
I'll leave it to the historian to answer that one.
I mean, it's a great point. I mean, I think actually part of what settler colonialism tries to do is normalize that possession as if it's natural. And I think for those folks that are not Indigenous here need to take up their role actually as disruptors to point out the illegitimacy of many of these systems that rely on exploitation and oppression, not just of Indigenous people. So thinking about, you know, the terminology that we use, of course, is important. I come from, originally from British Columbia, but I now live in Treaty 1 territory out in Winnipeg, and the treaty that allows me to live there identifies me historically as a settler. That was, you know, the language that was used. But I think of myself more as a collaborator of someone who wants to create a different kind of world that's not tethered constantly to harm and exploitation of fellow humans and everybody around us. So I think that the shift that you're talking about is what's needed. Everybody needs to embrace that understanding of the world in a different way to disrupt what's going on, not just here in Canada, but around the world. And hopefully this book is an invitation to have a conversation with Ellen about some of her thoughts on what that could look like.
Sego Skanagoa, namaste. Thank you so much, Nyawa, for this. The Office of the Independent Special Interlocutor, Kimberly Murray, has released quite a groundbreaking report. And she writes it as an evidentiary document to be submitted to, for prosecution of the genocide, the historical and ongoing genocide. And someone we mutually know, her name begins with a K, says that the laws of Canada, so-called Canada, the laws will have to change, and this genocide and ecocide and ethnocide against Indigenous people perpetrated and perpetuated by the church and state is true and is evidence to be submitted and prosecuted at international courts. The cockeyed optimist in me says, you know, the system is crumbling, and I would like to know what you think free Onowarage looks like, a free turtle island, if you could talk about that. Nyawa, thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that question, simply because there are so many peoples with an S and cultures I don't know. I do know that freedom is something we don't talk about. What does it mean? What are the connotations when we say freedom? And for me, it's that ability to feel like I'm valued, but I also am giving back. And if we go along the philosophy of one dish, one spoon, that's a beginning for a free turtle island, in that people who are, you know, for those of you who are not familiar with one dish, one spoon, it's a bowl. And everything that we need is in that bowl. And there's one spoon to go around for everybody to take from that bowl. But you only take what you need. And then you put it back and you give it to someone else. If we understand that concept more on a bigger scale, we see that there would be no more poverty. There would not be violence against Indigenous women or women in general. There would not be a genocide happening across the ocean. There would not be children who are starving or children who go to school hungry. And that children will be able to learn from the land. Their classroom is not just in a box, but it's outside. And I feel that freedom for all our relations, but the freedom for the fish to be able to live in something that the US Navy is not going to destroy through their sonar. That cities like Montreal will not dump their garbage in my community so that future generations cannot enjoy it anymore. That there has to be something, the system is broken. This system, the Indian Act system, all the systems that we are currently using are not for our benefit. It's for population control, it's for control of who gets what, and it validates and it nurtures. It nurtures bad behavior, I guess that's. And so the people who are good people have to struggle. And they have to make that choice of, do I stay home and just stay out of it, or should I go out and support other people I know are suffering? And that freedom to choose, as we say in the Longhouse, the Creator made us all with a mind, a free thinking mind. And it's how we use it, I think, is the key to getting to that freedom. And it could mean, I know for certain it's going to mean something different to every single person sitting here. For me, my freedom is feeling safe. And I don't feel safe in my community. So until I do, I come to Montreal to feel safe, which is very ironic. But thank you, Raj, for the question.
Ellen, many people will purchase your book because of who you are and with respect. But I'm just wondering if there's a story behind the title. I'm always intrigued with book titles, whether it's the publisher pressure or whether obviously you would have had a say in that. So when the pine needles fall. I'm just wondering what your story is. Thank you.
There's many things that spring to mind about when the pine needles fall. Is when in the fall, like right now, they blanket the earth in red. That's why I like the color of the pine needles on there. But if the municipality of Oka and their private investors were successful in cutting down, the over 200-year-old pine forest that we grew up in, and that is our mother, in a sense, those pine needles would be on, all those pine needles would be down on the ground. So the acts of resistance are protecting, and those, the pine needles are just a symbol of the land and our resistance to protect the last vestige of common land that we have in Kanehsatà. And the great white pine is a symbol for the Haudenosaunee people. Under it is the great white roots of peace. So there's so much meaning for me. And I'm glad that the pine needles didn't fall. They have fallen at the hands of our individuals from our community, which is painful. But until that last pine needle falls, the pines is that legacy from our ancestors who fought really hard to plant those trees and give us something to hope for. Thank you.
So maybe just to wrap up, I don't know if Sean, Wanda, Ellen, maybe if you want to share just a few last kind of words to close out the evening. Start with Sean and afterward.
I mean, just again, gratitude, to Wanda and Samir for being here, for Norma and everybody for organizing, for everyone coming, but also, thanks to Ellen. This was a long project. It was harder than I thought. I had said, we'll do this in a year and it would be great. Out for the 30th anniversary, and here we are on the 34th anniversary. But I treasure this set of conversations as a snapshot of our ongoing dialogue about how to make the world a better place. And I'm just so thankful that you folks have an opportunity to sit down with Ellen and learn from her. Because she has this incredible love for the land, but also a lot of hope for the future. And every time I speak with Ellen, I'm just reminded of how much that's such a gift in our world right now. So thank you.
I just want to say thank you also to everybody who came together to collaborate to pull this off. It's been a very special moment to share this with my cousin. It stirs a lot of emotion because we've walked a hard path. And one of the things that as a community member that I have witnessed is that Ellen has taken a lot of heat for speaking her truth and for the action she's took in our community to protect our ancestors, to protect our pines. Our community has never said thank you to Ellen. And I just want to say it from the bottom of my heart. Nyawagoa for your strong words, your conviction, and standing strong all these years. I don't know where we would be in Kanehsatà if you didn't take the stand that you took. Really, really, Nyawa. From the bottom of my heart, Nyawagoa.
I mean, I'm not going to say anything except for just thank you to everyone to have come here. It's really been an honor for me to share this space with Wanda and with Sean, and of course, to continue to learn from Ellen after all these years. It seems a bit both surreal and humbling, I would say. I mean, I'm often just, as some of you know, Ellen was awarded honorary doctorate at, from Université du Québec, Montréal, UQAM, a few months ago. So I didn't actually say it for people to clap at that point, but we had the honor of being there, and what really struck me was, it was for the Faculty of Political Science and Law. There were probably 200 to 300 people, graduates, and then, as is always the case, Ellen gave a really powerful address, and at the end, as Ellen often does, she went off script because she had to submit her script to, the powers that be of what she can say and what she can't say, and so she went off script. And when she went off script, she basically just put her fist up and said, peace sign, victory sign, free Palestine, and the whole crowd just got up. 300 people, standing ovation. So I just wanted us to get up and recognize Ellen for all the work that she's done for all of us for all these years.
How do you follow that? I'm truly honored, and I'm really grateful to Norma Rantisi for being such a good friend and wonderful friend. She's a professor of Concordia University, for arranging for this book launch to happen here. So I thank you, Norma, wherever you are. I can't. And I thank my cousin Wanda for always being there when I need her. And she's heard a lot of my grief over the years, but she's taught me so much. And she's part of the teachers that I've had in my life, so I want to thank her for always encouraging me, and when I get the heat from my community, that she's there for me. And I want to thank Sean for initializing this idea and for his patience and courage in hanging in there. You've been a great inspiration to me. You've taught me as much as I've taught you, I think. And I'm very grateful and truly honored to have your friendship, to stand by me to write this book. Sean told me, he says, you can do speeches and stuff like that, but a book will last till the next generation. So I thank Sean for this. And to my good friend, dear friend, Samir, thanks for making me cry. You've taught me so much, and you've also been there in emotional support and just to bounce ideas off of. So I value our friendship and all that you've taught me over the years. So thank you so much for honoring me with being the facilitator for this, and for honoring me for all the gifts you've given me over the years, to being my friend. Thank you. There's just one more person that I want to thank, although all of my friends, I thank you for being here and supporting me. To my partner Tracy, too, who's taught me a lot, about policy and, how to speak Kahnawake speak. And for listening to me and for caring for me throughout these years. We've been together 20 years. What? That's not what she told you? But and I have a very good family. I have a strong family. My sisters, my brother who passed away, who I dedicate this book to. My aunties, my parents. I've had wonderful teachers. Walter David Sr., who I acknowledge in this book, was one of the first teachers to teach me about the Great Law. And he always used to say, go give them hell. And he said, don't let them get you down. You're doing something good. And those words carried me through those really difficult times right after the crisis, the siege. And so I want to remember him. He passed away in, 20 years ago? We'd go to Dairy Queen. He was diabetic, and his family would get mad at me. He said, let's go to Dairy Queen. And so we'd have these talks, right? And he'd teach me about what life was like for him. He was in Iwo Jima, and he was severely injured then. But he taught me to laugh in spite of the stress. And so I want to remember him. And to my family and friends, thank you for putting up with me. And hope to see you at the movies. Thank you, everybody, for coming.